Listen up, friends. Before we start this big and difficult conversation, I ask you one thing. Don't scroll past. What we'll talk about today isn't just dry facts about an old piece of metal. This is the story of a systemic error that cost thousands of lives. A story about how good intentions and wrong decisions at the top turn into tragedy down below, in the trenches. This story has repeated itself countless times in history, and I'm sure there are lessons in it for all of us today. So, if you're interested in the unvarnished pages of history, the real, unglossed truth about war and how systems work, stay with us until the end. And of course, your opinion in the comments is priceless to me. Write what you think as the story unfolds. And now, let's dive in. Imagine the beginning of the Great Patriotic War. The chaos of retreat, confusion, a fiery hell. And in this hell, a simple Russian soldier, a Red Army man, is given a new weapon. Not a rifle, not a grenade, a whole mortar. Practically personal artillery. 50 millimeters, almost 40 pounds of metal that promises to drop a shell on the enemy from almost a kilometer away. He should feel stronger, better armed. But instead of confidence, bewilderment. Instead of deadly efficiency, helplessness. And so this soldier, with an unbearable barrel on his back and heavy trays of shells, runs in an attack with everyone else. And he is the first candidate for death. This isn't a fiction. This was the reality for tens of thousands of soldiers who had to serve with the so-called company mortar of 50mm caliber. The most mass-produced and the most controversial, the most disputed weapon of the beginning of that terrible war. Today we will take a deep dive. We will analyze not just technical characteristics. We will understand why a smart, on paper, idea turned into a bloody failure. We will look at the economy, the pre-war doctrine, Stalin's purges in the army, and the cold logic of the assembly line. We will compare it to what the Germans and the British were doing. And I will share my, perhaps unexpected, opinion with you. Ready? Then let's go. Chapter 1. The Dream and the Iron. Where did this company man come from? To understand the tragedy, you need to understand the dream. And the Red Army in the 30s dreamed of the most modern, the most mobile, the most high-tech army in the world. A feverish industrialization was underway. The country was turning from agrarian into an industrial giant. And the army had to match, to become a machine mechanized. But there was a problem. The problem was called infantry firepower. The main mass were riflemen with the Mosin rifle. Against machine guns, against fortified points, they were almost powerless. It was necessary to give the infantry its own, immediate, direct fire. Not to wait for the artillery to deploy somewhere and fire a salvo. A weapon was needed that would go with the infantry in the skirmish line. Two options were seen as such weapons: rifle grenade launchers and ultralight mortars. Rifle grenades are an ambiguous thing. Low accuracy, ridiculous range, the recoil breaks the stock. But a mortar is a brilliant invention in its simplicity. A mobile, light little mortar, firing on a high-angle trajectory, can lob a shell over a hill, into a window of a house, into a trench. The idea was in the air all over the world. And the Soviet Union, with its cult of technology and mass production, seized on it. The task was formulated clearly: to create a mortar for the company level, to have one in every platoon, for 2 men to carry it, for it to weigh little, and for it to hit maybe not far but accurately. So, in the late 30s, the family appeared: RM-38, 39, 40. RM, company mortar. Let's look at it through the eyes of an engineer. What do we see? Compromise. A hard, total compromise for one goal: lightness. Here is the barrel. A short pipe. It weighs, depending on the modification, from 12 to 17 kilograms. Is that a lot or a little? For a mortar, very little. For an infantryman who already has a full kit, an unbearable weight. Here is the base plate and the bipod. Primitive, light. And here is the most interesting part: the aiming mechanism. Or rather, its almost complete absence. The sight is tiny, of the pistol type. The sight line length is less than 15 centimeters. Imagine you need to aim a pistol at a target 600 paces away. Absurd? Yes. But that's how it was. And how to adjust the range. Oh, that's a separate brilliant find. Not by changing the elevation angle, that's complicated, but by bleeding off the propellant gases. There was a hole in the barrel that could be opened or closed. The more gases escaped sideways, the less energy the shell would get, and it would fall closer. Technologically simple, but in practice, a nightmare. The pressure was slightly different each time, the gunpowder was different. The accuracy of fire was nil. And most importantly, when fired, a bright plume of flame and gas burst out of this hole, raising a column of dust in summer and snow in winter. It's like shouting to the enemy, "Hey, I'm here. Shoot here." And this contraption, with its maximum range of 800 meters, on paper, in practice 400 to 600, and a shell weighing less than a kilogram, went into the troops. Massively, by the thousands. It was declared not just a support weapon, but a linear infantry weapon. This is a key phrase, remember it. Chapter 2. The doctrine that killed. To the attack. Carry the mortar. Now, let's move from engineering drawings to regulations. To that very organizational tactical scheme mentioned in the original text. This, my friends, is the heart of the tragedy. The RKKA command, fascinated by the idea of universal mortarization, wrote the 50mm mortar directly into the rifle platoon. Not into a platoon attached to the battalion, but right into the ranks. A two-man crew was listed in the squad, and they were given the order in the offensive to go in the chain of attacking infantry, with everyone else. Run, fall, get up, and carry the 16-kilogram barrel, plate, and trays of shells on themselves. Let's turn on our imagination and picture a battlefield in the year 1941. German positions. Entrenched MG-34 machine guns with their monstrous rate of fire. Experienced snipers. Wehrmacht mortar crews. And here a Soviet company rises to attack. Among the gray overcoats, a few guys who stand out like turkeys in a chicken coop. One has a long iron pipe on his back. The other has flat iron box trays. They are stooping under the weight, stumbling. They can't quickly hit the ground, quickly dash. They are the perfect target. For a German machine gunner, this is the first target. To destroy a mortar crew means to deprive the company of its supposedly firepower. And they were destroyed. En masse. A crew lived in battle for mere minutes. This was not a support weapon. It was a suicidal burden. But why? Why such insane tactics? The answer lies in the pre-war doctrine. The Red Army was preparing for an offensive, maneuver war on foreign territory. The idea was a fast, swift breakthrough. Defense wasn't given serious attention. It was believed that the mortar should destroy targets immediately, on the move. It wasn't seen as mini artillery that takes up a position, zeroes in, and methodically processes squares. It was seen as a big grenade that could be quickly thrown at the enemy. There was a second, darker reason. The purges of 37 wiped out the flower of the command staff. In place of experienced commanders who went through the Civil War and studied, came young, often politically vetted, but tactically illiterate personnel. They blindly followed regulations. The regulation said mortar in the chain. So be it in the chain, even if it was absurd. Chapter 3. A view from the outside. How did they do it? To understand the scale of the mistake, you need to look at how our opponents and allies solved the same problem. And here the picture is striking. Germany.
5 cm Leichte Granat Warfare 36, 5 cm Light Grenade Launcher 36.
The Germans, pedantic and practical, also created a 5-centimeter mortar. Yes, it had a slightly shorter range, 520 meters. Yes, it weighed a fair amount, 14 kilograms in firing position. But the Germans never considered it a breakthrough weapon. It was a weapon of the squad, yes, but with a clear niche. Fighting enemy personnel at short distances, especially in complex terrain, ravines, reverse slopes of heights. They weren't thrown into the first line of attack. The crew operated from cover, supporting their machine gunners and riflemen. And most importantly, the Germans had established tactics, communication, and trained crews. Their mortar was part of a system, not its main and most vulnerable element. Great Britain.
High in Mortar.
And here, friends, is the most telling example. The The British made their 2-inch, that's the same 50mm mortar, for entirely different purposes. Look at its characteristics in the table. Range, only 457 meters. Weight, less than 5 kilograms. It was tiny. Its main task was not high-explosive fragmentation. Its main ammunition was smoke and illumination shells. Imagine you need to lay a smoke screen to hide a company's dash, or illuminate the area at night. For this, you don't need super range and power. You need mobility and quick deployment. One man could carry and operate it, and it perfectly performed its narrow but important role. And what did the USSR do? It took the idea of an ultralight mortar and tried to stuff into it functions of a direct support gun that were not inherent to it. It wanted a fly to pull a cart, and forced it to do so at the cost of its life. Chapter 4. Hellish Logistics. 56 shells that are never there. Let's talk about numbers. Boring but deadly important supply numbers. The standard portable load for a 50mm mortar is 56 shells. A nice number. And now the harsh practice. A mortar is not a rifle, aim and shoot. To hit a target, you need to zero in on it. The simplest way is bracketing. The first shot is made overshoot. The second undershoot. And then, by adjusting, you cover the target. This takes, at best, 5 to 6 shells. Sometimes all 10 to 12. And that's only to find the target. To destroy it, you need a few more shots. As a result, 15 to 20 shells are spent on one single machine gun nest or group of enemy soldiers. Now let's calculate. 56 divided by 20. That's 2 or 3 targets per battle. 2 or 3 targets, after which the crew turns into 2 unfortunate infantrymen with a huge useless load. And the battle is just beginning. And the enemy counterattacks. And you need to hold the defense. Resupply of ammunition in conditions of an offensive, let alone the retreat of 41, was a fantasy. No vehicles, horses dead, communication lost. And the crew was left alone with its helplessness. They were forced to abandon their mortars, and that was a terrible crime under wartime laws. Or they died trying to carry them. This logistical pit only aggravated the design flaws. A weapon that cannot sustain prolonged fire cannot be effective on the battlefield. It's a disposable toy. Chapter 5. The Human Factor. 2 days of training and into battle. And who fired these mortars? Who were these doomed crews? They were simple guys, conscripted from villages and cities. Mechanics, tractor drivers, teachers. They were taught military affairs properly. But there was catastrophically little time. Mass training of mortarmen began only in the spring of 1941. There were mere months left until June. What can you manage in 2 or 3 months? Teach them to load, aim, conditionally, and fire. But a mortar is artillery. It requires skills. Estimating distance by eye, there's no rangefinder. Working with a map, basic ballistics, fire adjustment. They didn't teach that. They didn't have time. As a result, by the 22nd of June, most crews did not know how to effectively use their weapon. They could fire a shot, but they couldn't hit, especially on the move in an attack under fire. Their bewilderment and inability only increased the losses. They didn't help their company. They were a burden and a source of death for it. Chapter 6. Harsh Lessons and a Belated Reform. 41 became a terrible but the most effective teacher. Commanders who survived the bloody meat grinder of the border battles understood. We can't go on like this. In the autumn of that year, a quiet but revolutionary reform begins. 50mm mortars are withdrawn from the companies. They are taken from the platoons and combined into platoons of 50mm mortars as part of battalion mortar companies. Hear the difference. A company weapon became a battalion one. And this changed everything. Now they were commanded not by a sergeant from a rifle squad, but by an officer, the mortar platoon commander. He had binoculars. He, as a rule, had at least some artillery training. He could coordinate the fire of several mortars at once, set real fire missions, suppress the machine gun in that grove, cut off the infantry from the tanks. Management became centralized and competent. And what do you think? Effectiveness immediately increased. When mortars are handled by specialists, when they fire from prepared, at least slightly covered positions, and don't run with them at full height, they start to bring benefits. Small, but benefits. The tactical error began to be corrected. But was this the salvation for the 50mm?
Alas, no.
Chapter 7. The sunset of the 50mm. Why it was killed not by the Germans, but by its own. By 43, the war had changed. The Red Army learned to fight. It gained colossal experience, new command cadres, the most powerful industry in the rear. And the question of optimization arose. Of unification. Of power. And here the 50mm mortar lost completely. Its tactical niche turned out to be terrifyingly narrow. Let's compare. Company man, 50mm range, 800 m. Shell weight 0.85 kg. Battalion mortar, 82mm range, 3000 m. Shell weight 3.4 kg. The difference is many times over. Fighting with an 82mm mortar was both easier and more effective. It covered a larger area. Its shell was feared not only by infantry but also by light vehicles. Yes, it was heavier, its crew was 4 or 5 men. But it solved tasks at the battalion and even regiment level. And what could the 50 do? Fight personnel at direct fire range. Machine guns, 45mm guns, and later anti-tank rifles could handle that too. It was also simpler and more profitable for the industry to make one powerful and needed mortar than two different ones, one of which was of dubious usefulness. Assembly lines, tuned for mass production, work better on one product. And in June of 1943, the State Defense Committee makes a decision: cease production of 50mm mortars. Their era was over, not because they were all destroyed, but because they were simply abandoned as a failed idea. The remaining specimens in the troops lived out their days, gradually sent for scrap or to training units. Lessons of one mistake. So what was it? A failure of the designers? No. The designers made what they were ordered. An extremely light, cheap, mass-produced mortar. A failure of the soldiers? 1,000 times no. The soldiers died trying to carry out an insane order. It was a systemic failure. A failure of military doctrine that did not pass the test of reality. A failure of the management system that viewed a soldier as a cog obligated to carry an inadequate piece of iron on his back. A failure in personnel training that didn't have time and couldn't teach. This is a story about how a beautiful idea, divorced from tactics, logistics, and human capabilities, turns into its own murderer. When I studied this topic, one thought haunted me. How many thousands of guys died, becoming a target only because they had this ill-fated pipe on their backs? Their death is not a heroic death in battle with a weapon in hand. It is the tragedy of systemic stupidity. This story repeats itself, not necessarily in war, in business, in politics, in social projects. When a decision is made at the top without considering the realities below, when a beautiful reporting figure, on paper, in every company, is more important than real effectiveness. When the human factor is ignored, expect failure. Expect tragedy. The 50mm company mortar is a monument to such an error. A monument of iron and blood. Friends, we have come a long way with you. From pre-war drawing boards to the trenches of 41 and the assembly lines of 43. If this deep analysis made you think, if you saw something important in this story not only about the war but about our life, then my work was not in vain. And now my call to you, and it is very important. I put an enormous amount of time into these stories. Archival searches, analysis, comparison of facts. I do this so that our common past is not a myth, but an understanding. And so that we learn from mistakes. Your support is a signal that such work needs to continue. Therefore, if you care about real history, subscribe to this channel. Hit the bell so you don't miss new, equally deep and frank analyses. We will talk about other weapons, about forgotten operations, about the fates of people in that war. Without pathos, without varnish. Only facts, analysis, and human stories. And most importantly, write in the comments. What do you think? Was the fate of the company man predetermined? Have there been examples of such systemic mortars in your life? Ideas doomed to failure due to detachment from reality? Your opinion, your stories are an invaluable part of our common conversation.